Right then. Hello, willkommen, bienvenue. It's time for another Amish Inquisition episode 357 on Sunday, the 8th of December, 2024. I'm Phil.
And I'm Matt.
And no Ben this week.
No.
But never fear, because we're very happy to be joined by a special guest tonight, and that is all the way from Canada, I believe. The author of this book that I hold up regularly on this podcast, Carl Teichrib. Is that correct? Teichrib, is that the correct pronunciation?
That's absolutely right. You nailed it.
Super. Yeah, I hold this book up regularly because we talk to a lot of people in the New Age movement, don't we?
Yes.
To varying degrees, authors, researchers, people who put videos on YouTube. And I've been down that whole rabbit hole, starting probably when have you heard of the Zeitgeist movie that came out about 20 years ago? That was
absolutely.
Yeah, that was my way into it. That was like the what do they call it in drugs? Gateway drug. That was the gateway drug for me. And that's why I thought it was really important to get you on, because you offer a completely different perspective on the New Age movement and how it's maybe been co-opted. Is that fair to say?
Oh, that's co-opted. I would suspect actually it's kind of always had a certain intentionality from the very beginning, and there seems to be, in a way, you could say maybe two branches of it. You've got just the average person who, like yourself, has jumped into it through because of some communication, some movie, some book, some avenue. And then there's those who have been within the leadership, within the movement from a more influential position, who've held a particular worldview since the beginning. And so where I look at it as I see the average person kind of just jumping in, you're exploring, you're trying to understand it. There's a certain sense or a certain appeal all of a sudden to that message. And at the same time, those who have been involved as within that influencing side, the organizing side of it, they're coming at it from a very serious, even more serious perspective. They're oftentimes even bringing in a political side to the entire endeavor as well.
Yeah, I get the impression that most people who go down this road, they're looking for answers. Mm-hmm. They're not satisfied with sort of the mainstream materialist paradigm.
Right.
The sort of ultra scientific, we're meaningless biological robots floating through a speck of dust in a accidental universe. We've heard it all a million times, and sort of a reaction to new atheism and stuff like that. And so people who are searching for something are vulnerable to people who have answers and who are very sure of themselves in the answers that they're providing, aren't they? Oh shit.
When it becomes a kind of coalesces with alternative spirituality, theosophy plays a big role within it, and then it kind of blends in with the human potential movement that was being promised to the masses by institutions like the Esalen Institute and other groups. And so in the 1960s, you see this kind of a cultural disconnect. We were tired of the materialists, as you were describing it, the materialist paradigm. We went through World War I, we went through World War II. I mean, if we would go back in time and put ourselves in the late 1960s as, let's say, somebody in our early 20s or mid 20s, your grandfather was in World War I. Your father was in World War II. If you were in France or afterwards America, probably an older brother or an older relative would have been in Vietnam, and before that, even in Korea. And so you've had this generation that's had the experience of warfare, conflict, and all of this done at an industrial scale. I mean, World War I, the Great War, completely changed the ethos of your country. It changed the ethos of my country. I mean, Canada is really, in many respects, a satellite. We're kind of an in-between weird world between America and your country. And so it really did a number in terms of shaking up people's thought process about the direction materialism was taking us, because it gave us poison gas. It gave us the atomic bomb. It gave us the ability to kill at an industrial level, the likes that we had never thought of before. And so I look at the 1960s as being really important to try to understand the New Age movement, because it's a time period where the Judeo-Christian worldview has already been rejected. And I'm coming at it from that angle. The Christian worldview has already been rejected by the culture. But modernity isn't solving the inner angst, the problems of the heart, the problems of culture either. It's given us atomic bombs. It's given us mushroom clouds. It's given us death camps. And all of a sudden, we've kind of come into this time period where we're hitting a brick wall. And so the 60s hits, and it's like, well, where does authority come from? Where is our sense of purpose coming from? Where does meaning come from? And we see a lot of some fairly influential people moving out to the east, to India, looking for answers at the feet of gurus, looking to try to understand theosophy, bring that forward, the ideas of Aleister Crowley. And all of a sudden, you've got this mashup of ideas percolating in the engine of the counterculture. And so by the time the 1970s rolls around, it's this idea of the New Age is already coming into fruition. And you really see it kind of starting to gel by the late 1970s, early 1980s. My goodness, by the mid-1980s, major Fortune 500 companies are integrating New Age ideas to try to bring stress relief into the workplace. And you're doing yoga and TM and all the other stuff. And so it kind of shifts and it moves, and all of a sudden, poof, here we are. And you've dabbled with it. Lots of folks have either been involved in it or are still involved in it. But it's not a new idea. Not at all.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I can say is that if I hadn't discovered sort of esoterica and New Age sort of philosophy, I would probably still be an atheist. Like when I was 18, 19, 20, obviously I knew everything. I'd figured everything out, like the whole world and reality. I knew everything, and obviously there wasn't a God because, I was listening to Richard Dawkins and what's the other guy, the English guy?
Christopher Hitchens.
Hitchens and all that lot. So I've got to give credit where it's due, it turned me around in that respect, that it led me to believe there was something greater than this reality, this physical reality that we're born into.
Right. So it offered you a different way of looking at the world compared to your atheistic, materialistic, naturalistic worldview.
Well, that offers kind of nothing. It offers really nothing other than sort of nihilism and despair and hopelessness.
Completely. I've got a really good friend who he's a school teacher, and in his studies in university to get his education degree, one of the courses he had to take was the philosophy. I think it was the philosophy of mathematics, and he ended up having a really great relationship with his prof, and his prof was a pure materialist naturalist, and my friend had went back and forth with him a lot. And his prof basically at one point had his, I had to admit, I have to basically lie to myself every day to give myself a reason for existence, because my worldview is nihilism at the end. It doesn't have progress in mind. If I'm just an accidental grouping of atoms floating around in a meaningless universe, what's the point? Do whatever feels good until you die, right?
Well,
if that's true, if that's all there is,
Ironically, that sounds like "do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Crowley.
Bingo. Yeah, absolutely. And so he, for my buddy, he's like, man, that's a dead end street. I don't want to go down that road. There's got to be more to life. There's got to be more to reality, more to having purpose. From somebody who takes it from a Christian point of view, I look at God, literally the story that unfolds in the Bible, as the author of life, laying out the narrative and before us, and then having to make a choice. Do I follow the author of life, or do I look to find something on my own? Because if it's just finding something on my own, well, good luck.
Yeah. Going back to the book Game of Gods.
Yeah.
I was really interested in a lot of the background research you did and the visits that you were doing to these sort of global meetings and conferences and all that. Can you tell us a bit about that and the process and the research in the book?
Oh, for sure. So this is going to be kind of fun. I'm not a trained researcher. I'm not an educated man. I quit high school at the end of grade 11. I found in the words of my favorite Western author, Louis L'Amour, I found high school interfered with my education, so I left. And then in the very, very early 1990s, however, I was working for a senior citizens healthcare program in my little itty bitty community, a little town of 800 people. And I was being pressured intently to join the Masonic Lodge. Now, we never did join, but there was a lot of pressure on myself to jump on board. And finally, a couple of guys took me out for a supper meeting, a couple of my board members. Why don't you join the lodge, Carl? And I'm like, well, I got no interest in this. Going to more meetings doesn't exactly sound like a great time. And, and so one of the guys, I think in a way to try to maybe appease fears that I never had, because I'd never thought of it, he said to me, Carl, we're not Satanists. And my whole world crashed in a sense right there. It was like, oh, what have you guys been accused of? What's going on? This is like 1990. This is before access to the internet, cable television, podcasts, any of this kind of stuff. And so I thought, man, I need to know what in the world you guys have either potentially been accused of, or what do you guys really believe? And again, I don't have a formal background in doing research. I love reading. I always have. I've always loved learning. I just hated the institution of public school. It drove me nuts because I'm a bit of I guess, just how I'm wired. So I did the only thing that made sense. I went to look for the sources. I went to look through your rituals, your works of philosophy, your works of history. And then I just simply have used that ever since. Anytime I want to try to understand a particular topic, dive into it at a deep level, I'm not content with just reading a few articles about it, or maybe listening to a couple of podcasts or watching some videos on the topic. I want to dive into it. I want to jump right in and wrestle with it. And that requires then going to where the sources are, right? And so that's all I've done. That's my approach. And so when I talk about going to the United Nations in my book, or going to some big interfaith event like the Parliament of the World Religions, or talking about Burning Man, yeah, that's research. I'm going and I'm listening, taking tons of notes and listening. And where you can, ask the questions that hopefully will probe into it even deeper.
So can anyone just walk up and go to the United Nations?
No.
How do you do it?
And I couldn't either. How did I do it? I briefly explained it in one of my chapters. The first time I was at a big United Nations meeting, that was at the Millennium Forum in the year 2000. I'd already been engaged in trying to wrestle with and understand global trends, spiritual, political, cultural, and then later even technological trends, trying to understand that already a while ago. And by 1997, I was doing this full time as a researcher for an American-based author by the name of Gary Kaw, and I was helping him write his book, The New World Religion. And again, I was taking my research seriously by trying to attend events. And at that point, I had been really working to understand the concept of world government, global governance. And so I had found non-governmental organizations, special interest groups, lobbyist groups. The biggest one in the US by far was the World Federalist Association, which is part of an international world government group called the World Federalist Movement, which has branches in your country, has branches across Europe. And so I started to attend their meetings, and I ended up receiving an honorary membership from them. And it was simply because I had shown up and they were so pleased with all the work that had been done that even the guests were made members. Well, cool. Now I've got a card. I'm part of your little club. And so the first time I went to a United Nations event, I submitted my application. I had to submit other events I'd been to, and I'd been to already at that point a number of World Federalist events and a few other events that were related. And I submitted the fact I was, and there's a card. I was a member of the World Federalist Association. I didn't know it, but the United Nations Millennium Forum was run by the World Federalists. I didn't realize how deeply the World Federalists and the United Nations operated like this. And so the accrediting committee saw my name, knew the fact I was a member of the World Federalists, and I had a VIP seat in the first 3 rows of the General Assembly. Wow. It was pretty intense. It was crazy. I just accidentally stumbled into, kind of like, here's the key to unlock going to some of these kinds of events. Find the right NGOs.
Never heard of this NGO. Most people think Atlantic Council, Chatham House. There's
right. Yes.
A whole layer of ones that we hear about all the time. But this Federalist one, I'd never heard of it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yes, you'll have branches in the UK. You'll certainly have World Federalist connections. There's no question.
Rhodes, is it linked to Rhodes roundtables?
I think historically there's connections, yes.
Have you traced back the history of it and where it
came
from?
A little bit, yes. Yeah. A little bit I have. So, I mean, there are so many, and you're right, there's so many organizations like this. Everybody thinks of like the Club of Rome, but then they don't realize there's a Club of Madrid and a Club of Budapest, and there's the Spinoza Commission, and there's all kinds of groups out there, like layers and layers of NGOs operating with each other, creating networks and coalitions. So, I mean, my goodness, the World Federalist movement and the World Federalist community was front and center in creating the International Criminal Court. That's their baby. They're the ones who put the international coalition together to make the ICC happen. And then do, in a sense, an end run around the Security Council by going to Caribbean-based countries first and getting the support of smaller nations to push forward this idea. But it really came through the channels created by the World Federalists. That was theirs. So, another one, the right to protect, R2P, a military doctrine within the United Nations, within the international community. So much of that stems out of the work done by the World Federalists.
And the ICC's just announced that it wants to get hold of Netanyahu, hasn't it?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. International Criminal Court. Is that The Hague? Is that based in The Hague?
I believe it's based in The Hague, but it's part and parcel. I mean, The Hague has its own structures, the World Court, which I think has been in existence since, 1890s? I can't remember the exact year. Wow. The International Court of Justice.
Mm. And so...
But, yeah.
You mentioned was it the Millennial Council, the Millennial Conference?
Yeah, it was the United Nations Millennium Forum. During the year 2000, there were 3 primary events that took place at the United Nations, all of them interlocking. So the first one was the United Nations Millennium Forum. It was considered to be a people's assembly. And back then, Kofi Annan, the Secretary General, had invited the non-governmental community, the civil society organizations to come work within the United Nations to kind of give the UN a new direction, a new way forward. And the World Federalists were front and center with that. Then only a couple of months later, and by the way, a series of declarations and documents were produced, lots of working papers. And then a few months later, we had the United Nations Summit. which brought together the heads of state from, I think, 170 some countries. And they worked through the Millennium Development, or the Millennium Declaration, which would eventually become the the Sustainable Development Goals, and then the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as you know them. And then immediately after the Millennium Summit was wrapped up, the Millennium World Religions Summit, or World Peace Summit, took place at the United Nations just a week or even a couple of days after the big political one happened. And that was a bringing together of scores of religious leaders to have a massive interfaith event. So in essence, that year, Gorbachev also had a State of the World Forum taking place at the same time. So that year, the year 2000, you had a coming together of the NGO side, the political side, and the religious side, all under the umbrella of the United Nations through the forum, the summit, and then the World Peace Summit, more or less coalescing the ideas around concepts of sustainable development, the Millennium Declaration. And then that launches into what we know today as, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals, which also still has this bridging going all the way back, of course, to 1992, back to the Rio Summit.
Rio Earth Summit. Yeah.
Yep.
So our government's banning, they keep sort of nudging it back, but they want to ban diesel and petrol cars by 2030, I think, don't they?
35 now.
2035 now.
Yeah, 5
keep
years
rolling
more.
it back, because guess what? No one wants them.
Yeah.
No one wants electric cars.
And good luck. Your electrical grid is going to be able to, is it going to be able to take that? Hey, gentlemen, you got to burn more coal if you want your electrical grid to power up all those electric cars. Yeah. I mean, come on.
I mean, our grid suffers from a lack of investment as it is, and trying to power, because it's not just the cars, it's the gas stoves, it's our gas boilers that heat our homes. They want to get rid of everything and move everything onto the electric grid. It's just that I'm in the industry, I'm in the electrical industry. No one's talking about it. No one's talking about the disaster that would occur if they just tried to flick a switch overnight, and the amount of money that's going to have to be invested in the infrastructure to get us even halfway ready to switch over.
Exactly.
It's like the politicians are just living in a different reality from the rest of us.
It's a religion. It has in itself a religious component. So it's this idea that they have some type of ability to save the world. Whenever you watch or take a look at any of the material that comes out of, let's say, COP29, which happened just a few weeks ago, or next year's convention of the parties to the climate change convention that's going to happen in Brazil, just watch the headlines as they come forward. Will COP30, or this last one, COP29, save the world? Global leaders coming together to save planet Earth. I mean, just the language, and you're going, who made you savior? Who put you in on this pedestal to be godlike and claim that we're in mortal danger, and the only way to save the planet is to put you, the international leaders, on top of the pedestal? I mean, sorry, that has a religious smacking all in its own. You've got an eschatology, you've got an end of the world scenario. You've got your own, you have your own political priestcraft. You've got your sacred texts, your UN declarations. I mean, it's all there. Yeah. It literally is all there. It's crazy. So in my book, chapter 11 on the cult of world order, which goes into this idea of global governance, I'll just read you a quote from the American actress. Here she is.
Which actress is it going to be?
I'm just
Jennifer Aniston.
Paltrow. Jean Stapleton. She's long gone, but remember, All in the Family, or whatever it was called. Actress Jean Stapleton, she was an endorser of this idea of world federalism, along with John Denver and Walter Cronkite and Lloyd Bridges. But this is her endorsement of the idea of world federalism to the World Federalist Movement itself. If this doesn't sound like religion, tell me what is. The goal of the World Federalists is peace through unity of government. We must support their vision of oneness in diversity, for it is the salvation of humanity.
Wow.
like being at church on Sunday.
It is. It's like, if you look
Yes.
back through history, there's this phenomena called millenarianism, and it happened around the year 1000 AD because of people thought, because we're approaching the year 1000, this could be it. This could be the return of Jesus or the end of the world, the apocalypse, whatever. And similar thing happened because we're talking about the Rio Earth Summit, which is early 90s, and then we have this thing
1992, yeah.
92, and then this 2000 summit. You wonder if that's part of the motivation, if there's a bit of sort of new age millenarianism in their makeup.
Absolutely. There absolutely is a new age cosmic spirituality that you'll find embedded within so much of this. So for an example, the United Nations Millennium Forum that I took part in, we had a lot of new age ideas, teachers. We had Lucis Trust, one of the patrons of the event. And their great invocation was handed out to us at some of the workshops.
Wow. How does it go?
I'd have to pull it up.
Oh, right.
But yeah, I don't know it off heart.
Because I don't know much about the history of the Lucis Trust. I don't know
It used
much
to be called
about it.
Lucifer Publishing Company. It was an offshoot of Alice Bailey.
Theosophy.
Which, of course, yes, that's right, 100%.
That's it. Yeah, it's rooted in theosophy.
Yes,
Interesting.
yes. So theosophy makes an important, an important role or an important contribution within international politics, especially through gentlemen like this guy, Robert Mueller, and his wonderfully titled book, New Genesis, Shaping a Global Spirituality. And Robert Mueller was the Undersecretary General at the United Nations for a number of years, had his hand, I think, in the creation of 11 UN specialized agencies. And he basically went from being agnostic or possibly atheist to being a believer through the works of Teilhard de Chardin, then through the works of Alice Bailey, and he became more or less a cosmic spiritualist, incorporating new age ideas, esoteric concepts, and believing that the United Nations should be the vessel through which all of this comes forth, not just politically but also spiritually. And he's a pretty big name at the United Nations from late 1990s. He'd already retired in the 1990s. I'd met him. My very first international kind of event I went to was on restructuring Canada's education system back in 1997. And Robert Mueller, with his United Nations World Core curriculum, was our keynote speaker and the influencer that helped to reshape Canada's education system to make sure all the children become good global citizens and look after your mother, the Mother Earth, and pay our carbon taxes, and all the rest.
How are I never even looked into this, but how's the United Nations funded?
Through your country and my country, through national contributions, through our tax dollars.
So, I mean, do all countries pay, the same percentage of GDP or something? How do they work it out?
Oh, I can't remember what the metrics was. I believe it is somehow attached to the GDP. I believe that could be, but I'd have to look it up again. But yes, national contributions make up the bulk of the United Nations budget. What is interesting is there's always an internal argument saying we don't have enough money. They're always saying that. We need more funding. And so if you take a look already in the mid-1990s, there was a commission on global governance that was put together. They produced a great big report. I've got it's just sitting over there called Our Global Neighborhood. And they suggested things like a global tax on currency transactions or fees, special fees on international flights. When I was at the Millennium Forum, there was discussion on putting a fee on carbon. That was definitely in the dialogue, and then all this could be used to help funnel funds into the United Nations.
Was that the 2000 conference you're at, where they were talking about a carbon tax?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
This idea of having global taxes, having some form of global taxation to support the United Nations, it's been around for a very, very long time. Like, I mean, it predates me. Absolutely. But here's an interesting one. I had it, thankfully, just sitting on my desk. So back in 1995, my Canadian government, our official foreign policy that year was to press the international community to give the United Nations its own standby military force, to give the United Nations its own, basically like a global SWAT force. It would be a vanguard unit that would go into a hostile zone, put a military footprint on the ground, and then wait for larger national military contributions to come in. And all this would be under the command and control of the UN Secretary General.
Right.
It wouldn't be under the command and control of national governments, but the Secretary General. In other words, we're going to give the United Nations its own military force. But the document goes into the problem of funding. And so it suggests things like global taxes, particularly the idea of a Tobin tax, having an international surcharge on currency transactions. So pounds to US dollars, Canadian dollars to pounds, going back and forth, there'd be a little cut off of that, and that would feed the United Nations.
Do they not already have like the blue helmets? Is that not like a UN army essentially?
Yes, of course, but that's national country or countries volunteering to contribute their forces to those efforts. It's not like the Secretary General has command and control of them.
You see, it's an odd one because the United Nations isn't a national. It's not a country. It's
That's right.
So how can a country have an army? I guess it would be like a private. Like mercenaries, like that one. It used to be Blackwater. I think it's got a different name now in America.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the only forum for international issues of international security. You have one in Europe, the Organization for the Security and Cooperation of Europe, that's been around for a long time. Yeah, in fact, the OSCE. In fact, it's the largest security forum in the world, bigger than NATO, because Russia's part of it, even bigger than the United Nations.
I got Russia's part of it.
Yes, yeah. In fact, what's interesting is it's one of the last,
that way?
It's one of the last international security forums that Russia still has a seat on, because it's kind of like the back channel. So yeah, look it up. OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. They don't have a standing force. It's not like that. It's not like NATO. NATO is, a coalition. It's not like the United Nations that has its own peacekeeping, but it's a place for global security issues to be hammered through and worked through. And it's more of a diplomatic kind of back channel organization. Your country sends ambassadors to it. My country sends ambassadors to it. Again, there's so many layers to the international community. It's crazy. So you got this hardcore political, pragmatic, security issue kind of forums. And then you've got, guys like Robert Mueller running around inserting his new age theosophistic cosmic worldview. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. And then you got other kind of sideline events that have a global impact, things like the Parliament of the World's Religions. Right. And I've gone to a few of those where the international community from the religious side and the political side will all come together to talk about things like climate change and pressing forward with the Sustainable Development Goals. And so you've got global political actors working with global faith actors.
Have you made it to Davos yet, Carl?
I have not. That one is, oh my goodness. Okay. So this is one thing about COVID. If there was one thing about COVID that I liked, was all of a sudden, so many of these impossible to get into events became virtual and public. All right. So in 2020, 2021, and maybe even 2022, I can't remember right now, I attended the virtual ones. Literally, they started up in Switzerland time, so I think I had to be up at 1 a.m. my time, and I just immersed myself and was typing in, just diving into all that was being said at the virtual Davos events. But I would love to go to Davos. I don't have that kind of pocketbook, not even remotely close. That's out of my league financially. Yeah.
Last time I looked, which would have been around 2020, I think you had to pay 26 grand a year.
insane.
Just to be a member, whether you would get access to the event included in that, I doubt very much. I think you've got to probably rub some shoulders and slip some backhanders across here and there to wheedle your way in. Do they got very popular with us tinfoil hat wearers in 2020 and onwards. They were the butt of most of the jokes, and that picture of Klaus in his space god uniform was kind of
horrible. I mean, come on! Like, where do you go shopping, man?
Well, this is my point. Are these guys clowns, or do they have some real clout?
No. They're not clowns. They have clout. They have this sense of what, and Thomas Sowell, the American economist, puts it this way: they have the vision of the anointed. They believe they're the anointed. They believe their vision goes forward. They really don't care too much what you think, because they're playing a very different game. They're involved in the biggest business on the planet, and that is politics.
Yeah, we've penetrated all your cabinets. Klaus famously said.
One of my personal kick myself situations was, so I wrote my book before COVID. Obviously, it was published in late 2018. I probably had taken out 200 pages of material because the book was way too big. And one of the sections I took out of chapter 11 was a big section I had written on the World Economic Forum, because I'm like, well, I've already dived into the World Federalist Movement in a big way and the United Nations. I've already made the case. And besides, at that point, the World Economic Forum wasn't known by too many people. And one of my big regrets was, all right before COVID, now knowing what the narrative during COVID was, the one organization all of a sudden everybody had the crosshairs on, World Economic Forum. What was the section Carl took out of his book? The section on the World Economic Forum. Like, just stupid.
Could you not have rejigged it and done a standalone book just on the WEF?
I could have, but it's an issue of timing. I mean, honestly, I should already have another book out, but life gets in the way of doing some of the things you need to do. And it's not a bad thing. It just is a thing. And so I'm like, I can't wait to actually get back into writing. I've written a few articles lately, but it's been a while since I've really sat down and done some serious writing. I designed Game of God specifically that almost every chapter can be pulled out and then fleshed out with another 100 to 150 pages of material to give you even more backstory into the idea of global governance or interfaithism or the New Age movement or paganism. So potentially there's like 15 books that can still get pulled out of just material that went into this one.
Yeah.
That was kind of the original design. This is the anchor. The rest of it can be built on afterwards.
I think one of the sections that you talk about where the game has changed and moved on probably the most in the last 5 years since it was published is transhumanism. And
Yes.
This is one of the fastest moving areas of your research, and it's something I'm quite jittery about. I'm very scared
understandably so.
Yeah, I mean, where do you think it comes from, the whole transhumanist movement?
Oh, good question. Okay, historically, the ideas of it you find intellectually being birthed out of two areas: theosophy and the esoteric schools of the late 1800s.
Wow.
This idea of creating the perfected man. Okay. In fact, my oldest example of finding the term transhumanism in use is within the Theosophical Society. I think it was in the 1890s. And then the other area that you find historically, its influence is in cosmism, with a little-known Russian philosopher by the name of Fedorov. And Fedorov, in the 1800s, kind of brings together theosophy, Orthodox Christian thinking, materialism. It's kind of a hodgepodge, but he looks at all this, he kind of bridges it all together. The Soviet Union comes up with the term cosmonauts based out of Fedorov's idea, because Fedorov's influence had already seeped all the way through into the Russian space industry before World War II even happened. And so by the time the 1950s comes around, you have Julian Huxley writing in his book, golly, what was the name of his book now? New Wine for New Wineskins. I think that was the effect of the book, the title of the book. He talks about the idea of transhumanism as being a new type of religion, of us awakening the cosmos. And once enough of us believe in this idea of becoming more than human, transhuman, maybe we can enter into a transhuman age. The Catholic mystic Teilhard de Chardin was talking about the ultra-human in the 1950s, the same idea of becoming a perfected man, that the whole world would all of a sudden birth a global consciousness, and that we would all become part of the cosmic Christ. All of that was coming into play at that time. This is in the 1950s. By the time the 1960s comes along, there's actually quite a few books being written on the potential for a new age in biology. You've got people like Jose Delgado getting funded by the CIA, doing brain implants in animals, then using a remote control device to control the movement of bulls or monkeys or cats. One of his most famous experiments, of course, is getting in the Matador ring in Spain, having a charging bull come after him, and he's standing there in the ring with this box, and he's presses a button or turns a knob or whatever, and the bull stops and then moves. And then he was able to say, look, we have the a psycho civilization ready to be birthed. We are just matter that can be rearranged. We're nothing more than neurological links. We're chemicals. We're just material that can be engineered. And so that's some of the thinking. So by the time the late 1980s, early 1990s comes around, especially the early 1990s, guys like Max Moore, are writing articles on the new transhumanist era that's coming. Early 2000s, you've got groups beginning to form around this idea of transhumanism. Again, it's an intellectual movement more than anything else, grabbing a hold of the future potential of technology and saying, look what we can do with it. Look at how we can take hold of evolution in our hands through the use of this technology. So you have groups then that pop up like the Mormonist Transhuman Association, which is still today, the largest religious transhumanist group. I've been to a couple of their meetings. The last one I was at was 2013, where I spoke at their annual conference as a Christian critic of religious transhumanism. So, all of this was already percolating. All this is building. And then, bam, COVID hits. And all of a sudden, people are going, what in the world is going on? And the concept of transhumanism even flourishes into different ways. Now we're really hardcore looking into the medical side of, all right, what kind of changes are we seeing? Yeah. And how does this potentially fit? Either it does or it doesn't, but what are the consequences? How is this getting played out? So again, in terms of just a historical survey, there you go. It's not a new idea. It's been around for a stinking long time. Predates all of us. But the idea just doesn't go away.
What's interesting, like a lot of the sources you cite there were areas like philosophy or theology or intellectual. You use the word intellectual. What interests me is the sort of pop culture side. So things like Star Trek, science fiction, Arthur C. Clarke.
Yes.
Not everyone, your man on the street who's working down the mines, is going to be reading German philosophy of an evening, but he might read Arthur C. Clarke.
Childhood's End. Have you read Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke?
No.
Oh, do it. 100% do it. It's probably one of his, besides Songs of a Distant Earth, those are his two, probably, I think, at least just from my perspective, his two most important books.
Really?
Yeah, definitely check it out. He was preaching. He was 100% preaching.
So you think he was against? He was against?
No.
Was he?
Oh no, he was for it.
Right.
He was for it. He was just communicating the vision that he held of a changed humanity, of an evolved materialist spiritual humanity. Arthur C. Clarke was a fascinating individual. He understood his science. My goodness, he was one of your country's foremost experts on radar, and during World War II, and then and then satellite trajectories. We owe a lot to Arthur C. Clarke in terms of the science, but then he also had a worldview, a cosmic spiritual worldview that plays out, especially in Songs of a Distant Earth. And Childhood End is just a totally different game. My goodness, I believe it was written in the 1950s. All of a sudden, over every major city in the world, UFOs are hovering, and aliens present themselves to humanity, and they look like the demons of old, and they help man evolve through gifted, special children. And then the entire earth absorbs itself into the cosmos until there's nothing left, and we are absorbed into this cosmic consciousness.
Oh, right.
He was giving you the new age completely.
It's ascension. We ascended.
Yeah. The entire planet does this.
Wow.
So, I mean, again, I'm coming from this from a Christian point of view, so I'm already wrestling all right with a critical angle. What are they trying to say? What are they trying to sell us? What is the clash of narratives that are happening here? From a biblical framework, I'm going, all right, well, I'm looking at this, I'm going, you're just playing God. Hence the title of the book. Games of God. You're just pretending or playing to be God and demonstrating yourself to be a master of destruction, because that's what we end up becoming. But we're pretty sucky at building something out of nothing.
Another aspect of the pop culture, going back to Star Trek again, is this sort of communitarianism. It's an idealistic future. Humanity's been through the shit show of the 2000s, and we've grown up. We don't need money anymore. We live in a world of abundance. All our problems have been solved.
What about the Klingons?
We try this. No more money. We try this at Burning Man. It only works for 1 week.
Yeah, but I mean that's fiction from the 1960s. Now people are talking about universal basic income.
Yep.
Central bank digital currencies. All these kind of things.
Stakeholder capitalism.
That's one of the WEF's favorite phrases.
That's right.
Yeah,
100%. It's all part of that. It's part of the restructuring.
Yeah. Do you think
which always kind of frightened? That doesn't frighten me. It always concerns me, because we don't need to be afraid, but we should be concerned. We don't want to live in fear, because that's not helpful. Nevertheless, it should be concerning, because then this stuff goes from the abstract, from the visionary, from the big idea, the crazy idea, and then it gets filtered through various forums and various channels, and comes in international conferences and becomes the focus of an international discussion, and then it ends up layering itself down to the national level, becomes policy. It ends up embedding itself into academia. It embeds itself into public schooling. All of a sudden, it's in our media, and the idea is no longer abstract. As nutty as some of the ideas may be, it's no longer abstract. It's becoming pragmatically pushed at the level of policy.
Well, I think,
and then
was it in Wales where they're piloting universal basic income?
I thought, that rings a bell, like in a village or something.
Yeah, in a very small area.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually running pilots now in the UK for UBI.
Well, I'm just looking at your prime minister, who's just kind of the same as my prime minister, except maybe more cunning in some respects.
Is he Castro's son as well?
And I'm going, my goodness. I mean, your PM fits the mold of that global citizen pushing for those very ideas.
Yeah.
Just like my PM is like, well, Canada's a post-nation nation, and we're going to destroy ourselves to show how international we are.
Well, you might not have heard, because it was only last week, but our MPs just voted through an assisted dying bill. And you lot over there in Canada were the trendsetters, I think, for that one.
Yeah, we have, that's our MAID program, medical assistance in dying. Yeah, Canada has, I think, with being MAID, it is now the 5th leading cause of death in Canada.
What?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's moving. It's moving from from, oh, I have a terminal disease and I want relief of that terminal disease, to going, I can't pay my bills and I have a mental health. I have a mental health crisis, and can I just get mated?
That was always the concern, isn't it? That it moves on to things like that.
Of course it does. It will. Absolutely it will.
Yeah, government sanction of killing your own citizens is never a good idea. It sounds like the Action T4 program that the Nazis were running.
Yeah, we don't want this.
No. I mean, is there any hope for you? Are you going to get, a change of? Could it be undone?
To a point, I think what's exciting is we are seeing pushback. We have seen pushback. We've seen pushback in your country. There's pushback in my country. COVID, we saw the rise of, at least for us, the trucker convoy. People I knew in that personally. There's a certain level of pushback when it gets too much. We're going to have our next election. I'm hoping way sooner than its designated time period of next fall. I'd love to see a non-confidence vote come through and topple our current regime and potentially give us a more conservative-minded government. I'm not under no illusion. Whatever government comes in still plays by the narrative to some degree. Nevertheless, maybe they can, unpack some of the things that have happened, undo some of the things that have happened, and I'm not sure if politics won't save us. Politics is nothing more than man's ability to attempt and the ability to interact with man. And sometimes it works great, and sometimes it becomes an absolute horror show.
Those trucker protests were a real eye-opener for me, and I'm sure lots of people in other countries watching. One of the things that I couldn't believe was how people's bank accounts were frozen. People who would donate. Just explain how that worked. What happened to people?
Yeah, well, now all of a sudden you don't have access to your money. You don't have access to your bank accounts. So, Minister,
it wasn't just the protesters, though, was it, Carl?
No, it wasn't. That included some of those who, I believe, up to 200 people had their bank accounts frozen, and that included people who just donated money as well. All of a sudden, being targeted for whatever reason. Why they were special, I don't know, but yeah. And all of a sudden, under this emergency order, the RCMP could then work with the banks, and then the banks could shut down those accounts. All of a sudden, your bank cards don't work anymore. You don't have the ability to pay your bills. You're not having the ability to pay your rent. Can't get fuel in your vehicle. And they did more than that. They also canceled, or at least temporarily nullified things like, I understand, driver's license, or not driver's license, but your vehicle registration for some of the guys with the semi trucks. And all of a sudden you're finding yourself in a legal no man's land, and it's not a good place to be.
It's pretty scary when the government comes after you like that, because they're so powerful.
Right, which is why we should be opposed to central bank digital currencies.
Absolutely.
I love the idea of privatized, how do you call it? Decentralized currencies.
Like
fantastic.
Bitcoin, like crypto.
Yeah, absolutely. My only concern with what decentralized digital currencies has done is, in a sense, it's given the government the license to say, "Oh, well, that's a great idea. Let's centralize it."
Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you. Like, get lost. Sorry, I'm not a big fan of over government institutions. That's one of the biggest takeaways of the last century that we have forgotten, is that in times of peace, governments have killed more people than what we have killed in times of war. And so there's always that danger. That was the lesson of the Soviet Union. That was the lesson of Mao Zedong. That was the lesson of Pol Pot. That was the lesson of Stalin with the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
It just goes on and on. Mozambique was another example. On and on. Cuba, North Korea. The list is almost like 300 million bodies piled up from the last century, from genocide or democide, death by government, typically in times of peace.
That's such a
Government's
great point,
killing unarmed civilians. So while we need government, we need regulation, we need, the ability for us to work together under important principles and the same rules, so to speak. What we don't need is government imposing their vision of what heaven on earth should look like, because it becomes a bloody utopian dream.
Well, we've got about 5 minutes, I reckon, left, Carl. Gosh, where do we go from here? I mean, well, let's look at the positive sides. What can we do as ordinary average citizens to sort of oppose massive global systems like the UN, the WEF, and whatnot? What can we do on a practical level?
Practically, number one, recognize that these ideas don't have any real impact until they hit at the local level. So become locally involved. All right. Become involved in whatever jurisdiction and in whatever capacity you are, as a business person or as a lay person. Let's say you've got a job as a school teacher. Wherever you are, become that ambassador for truth, and make sure that you're standing up and offering a counter narrative to what is being presented. Not everybody can run for politics. Not everybody is wired that way, but everybody can get a grasp of what's going on, so that you can begin to speak truth to those narratives. A big one, really simple, not simplistic, but it's there. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of these people. Don't be afraid of what's coming down the pike. Be concerned, yes. Don't let fear, the emotion of fear, rule your understanding, your logic, your responsibilities. Don't let fear overtake reason. And I've seen this a lot, where all of a sudden everything becomes the boogeyman. No, there's lots of stuff that isn't. Recognize the value of people. The value of people takes precedence over the value of institutions. People are more important than policies. Begin to live that out actually in your own personal life. Usually what we say is no to bureaucracy, and then we impose it ourselves in whatever way.
Right. You know, one of the big problems we have that I think we can tackle on an individual basis, going back to the transhumanism and the trajectory in which it's flowing, is that a lot of these systems are implemented because it's convenient. We think it's convenient. So look at how smartphones have developed and taken over our lives over the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. Online shopping being delivered to your door, everything sort of online, subscription-based.
Card payments
instead of people using cash. Well, it's easier, and I don't want a pocket full of change all day. I'll never get rid of it. We can take some responsibility on these scores, can't we?
Absolutely, we can. Of course we can. Of course we can. And that was one of the things we saw with COVID. I mean, as doom and gloom as it was, and how the fear porn was shoved down our throats 24/7 for 3 years, I was happy to see the fact that there was pushback. I was part of that. I was in a small way. A lot of my family members, a lot of my friends, a lot of people in my own church were in a small way, we were pushing back against it. We were still meeting. We were still talking with each other. We still hung out with each other.
Cool.
We still did things. We all of a sudden started realizing the importance of that local network.
Are you are you in like quite a rural community where it was
absolutely
easier?
100%?
Right. So yeah, it was easier for you sort of to meet under the radar, or I don't know, maybe you were really open about it and say, "Come on, we're all meeting here. Come on, get you."
Well, yeah, that's a good interesting point. So, there's times when you can be open. You have to make that stand at a certain level, and then there's other times, and this is where wisdom comes in, where you're going to be going, I'm just going to try to be as much under the radar as possible. And I had to explain it to a gentleman from our own church who was like, "Hey, we should just be open and just bold, and here we go, and just demonstrate to the whole world where we stand." And I'm like, I understand the sentiment, but when you pass the police, do you intentionally go, 30 clicks over the speed limit just because you can? No, you're going, I'm going to just I don't want to draw attention. And I will, if I all of a sudden need requires, I will go faster when I'm past him. But at that point of contact, I'm not there to prove myself, because now you're engaged in playing politics at a different level. They'll come at you. Best thing to do, and at least what we found with COVID was, we build each other up. We build our own little private networks. We learn who we can trust. Boy, was that ever a big takeaway from COVID. You learn who you can trust, and then you trust them, and you trust each other, and you just move forward. And if the policies say don't travel, again, I was fortunate. I live in when you say rural, yeah. We're out in the middle of nowhere. We just did what we needed to do because we have to live.
You made the point of learning who you could trust. Did you in Canada have this phenomenon of people gleefully dobbing in their neighbours for breaking social distancing and gathering, and it's almost like virtue signalling? Oh, look at him 2 doors down, he's having a party, maybe I'll ring the coppers.
Totally. My province, Manitoba, went the extra mile, which included snitch lines and putting enforcement officers on the street, and including having, in my little village of 200 people, because where my office is in a little village of 200 people, we had our snitches. We had people who were dedicated little snitchers. We know who they are. You know exactly who they are.
Stool pigeons,
100%.
Solzhenitsyn called them in the Gulag Archipelago.
Yep.
The state would put one in every cell.
Yeah.
Right. And then our premier went one step further and hired a global security company to put guys in special reflective vests and have them walk up and down streets. It's just crazy. It was just nuts. This is ludicrous.
Do you remember the guys who had the massive screens above their heads?
Oh, God, yeah.
We had guys in high-vis vests, and then they had this shoulder gear on, and above the head was a screen, like a flat screen, telling people to keep 2 meters and shit like that, didn't they?
Yeah.
Oh,
unreal.
My God, it's nuts. I hope
Totally.
I hope they don't try and pull that one again. But
hey, a lot of lessons were learned, and we should not forget those lessons.
Yeah, it's good to remind ourselves every now and again. We don't talk about it much anymore because we just OD'd on it. We were doing news articles week in, week out during 2020, 2021, and it just I got burnt out by it all. But it's important to remind ourselves, isn't it, and remember the lessons more importantly, just in case they try it again.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
And they probably won't try the same thing again. But history doesn't repeat; it always rhymes. It always has a new line to the poem, and that's what we're going to see. It won't be the same thing, but it'll be very similar. Yeah. It'll fit.
Well, Carl, this has been fabulous, fascinating, and thoroughly enjoyable.
Definitely.
Well, thank you. I'm glad, gentlemen. I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah. The website's up there, gameofgods.ca. That's the best place to get the book, isn't it?
Yep, absolutely. You can read excerpts of the book. You can go and poke through the bibliography, which is located on the webpage, and there you go.
Right. Well, fantastic. Like I say, I've said many times, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's a great book, and I can't imagine how much work went into it, to be honest, because it's talk to your wife.
Talk to my wife. My wife's absolutely incredible, and I mean that in every respect. Absolutely incredible, because it took 3 to 4 years of myself to kind of just have my nose only in that, and she was like, "Hello." The rest of us exist, and I'm like, I know, but I gotta get this done. So yeah, it was a big endeavor.
And totally worth it. So thanks for your time, Carl.
Yeah.
And I'll drop you a message tomorrow with some links. It's been wonderful, and best of luck with your future projects and your next book if you ever get it finished.
Appreciate that. You gentlemen have yourself a good evening.
Yeah. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, Carl. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Okay.
We'll be back shortly.
Yeah, we'll be back in 10 minutes or so.
10 minutes.
We're going to open the phone lines.
Oh,
yeah, we're going to open the phone lines, and maybe you want to talk about what Carl was talking about, all these NGOs and stuff, and we'll just play it loosey-goosey tonight, eh?
Why not?
Yeah, right. See you in 10, folks. Sayonara.